natin yan dahil iyan po talaga ay meron po tayong ebidensya na sumusuporta na kapag ginawa natin yan kasama ng hand washing, we can reduce the probability of a person to be infected by as much as 99%.
Calls to reconsider the revised distancing guidelines came after COVID-19 infections in Bulacan and the Calabarzon region picked up in the past 5 days. However, the DOH attributes this to improved contact tracing. Vergeres said that from the previous 1:3 contact tracing rate, authorities now manage a 1:10 close contact ratio. Meanwhile, the DOH reported slow progress in negotiations with various COVID-19 vaccine manufacturers. The government is still waiting for the response of Gamaleya to inquiries on Sputnik V's initial clinical trials data. Finalized confidentiality data agreement or CDA with other manufacturers, including Sinovac, Sinopharm, Pfizer, are also still pending. All of these have to be settled before the phase 3 clinical trials in the country can continue.
Itong ating mga negotiations na ginagawa for vaccine, this takes time. This really takes time because may mga meetings, may mga pasahan ng mga dokumento. So,
as for the WHO Solidarity Trial on COVID-19 vaccine, the DOH says the 18-month trial duration may start by the 3rd week of October. Some areas for the trial have been identified but have not yet been disclosed. The WHO is also still studying what vaccines among 34 candidates will be included in the phase 3 clinical trial in the country. The Philippine General Hospital will be the implementing agency for the trials, while the DOST has already allotted 89 million pesos for its operational expenses. For News 5, Greg Gregorio, we are One News.
The Health Department continues to call for the retention of 1 meter physical distancing guidelines in public transportation despite government moves to narrow the standard protocols. Health Undersecretary Maria Rosario-Morales said reducing social distancing could feed new infections. But presidential spokesman Harry Roque insists the IATF recommendation for the new required physical distancing is based on science and doctors' approval. Even former Health Secretary Manuel Dairit is in favor of reducing distancing measures for as long as individuals refrain from talking while commuting. Roque says it is now in the president's hands if the policy will push through. Still with the Health Department, it says it is grateful for the exclusion of Secretary Francisco Duque from the list of officials being recommended to face charges over PhilHealth controversies. In an online press briefing, Health Undersecretary Maria Rosario-Morales said this is welcome development for the agency. She thanked President Duterte for his continuous trust on the Health Secretary, who is also chairman of the PhilHealth Board. Vergeres said that Duque is still willing to cooperate in the investigations on the supposed anomalies in PhilHealth.
As we always say, mahirap po magpalit ng ating mga liderato kapag nasa gitna po na po tayo ng ating sitwasyon dito sa pandemic. It's really hard to have this kind of shift kapag po tayo ay meron ng ganitong sitwasyon sa ating pandemya. So we welcome it. We are very grateful and hopefully from here on we can continue to work. And mas panatag po ang ating pagtatrabaho dahil nagkaroon naman po tayo ng ganitong welcome development dito po sa ating mga issues.
DICT Secretary Gringo Honasan acknowledges his agency has limited capabilities to determine whether DITO telecommunity cell sites in military camps are using spy software. But he remains confident that the agency has enough measures in place to avoid threats to national security. Ria Fernandez with this story.
Despite complaints from the public about slow internet speed, Information and Communications Technology Secretary Gregorio Honasan claims that the internet connection in the country is, quote, just okay. During a House hearing on the DICT budget, Honasan reiterated that though the Philippines only has an internet speed of up to 3 to 7 Mbps compared to other countries that enjoy speeds of up to 55 Mbps, he believes it is not bad at all. Honasan said, though, that the DICT is taking full responsibility in managing the challenges in terms of improving the country's internet quality and speed.
Without going into figures, no? Dahil mas mabuti pong marinig ninyo yan sa ating mga kasamahan dito, we are not doing too badly. Even by law, we have improved a lot. Kaya lang po, naintindihan natin na napakahirap itong ipaliwanag sa taong bayan. No? Ang hinahanap nila is, bakit walang signal? Bakit walang internet?
In the same hearing, Honasan assured lawmakers that the DICT will exercise due diligence on the installation of DITO telecommunities towers in military camps, so as not to expose country to unnecessary threats.
Let me make an unconditional guarantee that your DICT will exercise its due diligence in looking at these variables para naman protected yung public and national interest, not only in terms of security, but the other benefits that accrue to what our main objective is, which is connectivity for the nation.
But when asked by Deputy Speaker Dan Fernandez to respond to fears of some that DITO towers may have spy software, Honasan admitted they have limited capabilities to check on this matter. He also mentioned about a power company that attempted to penetrate the state cyberspace.
Actually po, hanggang monitoring at tracking lang tayo, magugulat kayo na yung mga ibang entities, I will not go into details, no, because of obvious national security considerations, tinuturing nating mga kaibigan, pero namomonitor natin na gusto tayong pasukin sa power sector. For what reason? That's the next step. Gusto nating malaman kung bakit nila gustong pumasok.
Fernandez meanwhile admitted having an idea what company that Honasan was pertaining to, which involves power generation transmissions.
Well, this is owned by the state. Yung pong ginagamit ng NGCP, yung transmission line na yan ay pag-aari ng gobyerno. And we own that. And that's the reason why the good secretary is saying about the telecommunication component, because somehow there is an allegation from NTC that this is being used by the NGCP.
Though the Senate has previously questioned appointments of Chinese nationals as officials of the National Grid Corporation of the Philippines for possibility that they may control power industry in the country, Honasan said it is still a problem we need to handle.
But again, if you consider the reality of global politics, not to mention the security environment, I really do not blame them. It is our problem. If we are reduced to a reactive mode, pag may na-monitor na tayo, yun lang tayo magre-react. We want to develop a more proactive posture here, no?
Yes.
And the other reason is, of course, paumanin ninyo, ayoko namang i-discuss ito in an open hearing.
For News 5, Ria Fernandez, We Are One News.
A commission on appointments panel has moved to suspend hearings on the ad interim appointment of Housing and Urban Development Chief Eduardo Del Rosario. This after he was grilled on issues involving rehabilitation programs for both Marawi and Yolanda devastated areas. Senator Panfilo Lacson quizzed Del Rosario about supposedly missing funds amounting to around 5 million pesos that were for the Hajj pilgrimage of a few internally displaced persons or IDPs. Opposition lawmakers, meanwhile, questioned Del Rosario's lapses that slowed down the Marawi rehabilitation, they said. Others flagged a possible conflict of interest in his duties as concurrent Marawi rehab czar and HUDCC chair. Del Rosario denied these allegations. He said the Marawi rehabilitation is expected to be finished by the end of next year. The Commission on Appointments Committee on Human Settlements and Urban Development Vice Chair and San Juan City Representative Ronaldo Zamora requested to hold a second hearing next week to make way for other issues, including the Yolanda disaster and his plans for the housing agency. Lawmakers are questioning the Social Welfare Department on reports that some financial service providers are charging excessive transaction fees for the encashment of financial aid under the Social Amelioration Program. During the budget hearing at the lower house, Gabriela Representative Arlene Rosas said she received reports that some FSPs are imposing charges of 50 to 250 pesos upon encashment. The SWD Undersecretary Aimee Neri, on the other hand, stressed there should be no deductions if the beneficiaries will cash out through partner FSPs. These FSPs are Land Bank, GCash, RCBC, Robinsons Bank, PayMaya, and StarPay. Charges may only be applied if the beneficiary prefers a different service provider and it should not exceed 50 pesos. NERE assured that they will relay this matter to the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas for immediate action.
If we may be given a copy of those complaints and who are these beneficiaries, so much so that, Madam Chair, we will be able to request the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas and to require the service provider to refund them in excess of the 50 pesos being charged upon them.
Good evening, I'm Robbie Alampay. You're watching The Big Story. Former Supreme Court Justice Antonio Carpio joins the proponents of an international court complaint against China to stop its so-called unlawful oppression of Filipino fishermen in the West Philippine Sea. Marlene Alcaide with the story.
There's no stopping former Foreign Affairs Secretary Albert Del Rosario and former Ombudsman Conchita Carpio Morales in pursuing the complaint against Chinese President Xi Jinping and other Chinese officials. This time, they have another member joining their team as they raise China's supposed crime against humanity and illegal reclamations in the West Philippine Sea over to the International Criminal Court or ICC. Maritime legal expert and retired Supreme Court Associate Justice Antonio Carpio will be joining them as their counsel.
And I am happy to announce that Justice Tony Carpio has agreed to join our quest for justice as our counsel in this ICC case. Justice Carpio is a legal luminary with unparalleled wisdom and expertise in the South China Sea issue.
Morales and Del Rosario filed a communication against China before the ICC last March 2019. The ICC has already said that it has no personal jurisdiction in this case because China is not part of the Rome Statute and that the alleged crimes were committed in the country's exclusive economic zone and not within the Philippine territory. But Del Rosario believes that the ICC has a strong basis to proceed with the case as they've submitted new evidence. Del Rosario also noted crimes committed by China, such as the blockade within territorial sea of Scarborough, destructive reclamation projects, and the alleged harassment of Filipino fishermen in Pag-asa Island.
Part of our efforts is the March 13, 2019 communication that former Ombudswoman Chita Carpio Morales and I had filed with the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. This communication describes how China President Xi Jinping and other officials committed crimes against humanity by intentionally depriving Filipinos and other coastal inhabitants of the South China Sea of their food resources and livelihood.
Ex-Ombudsman Conchita Carpio Morales agrees with Del Rosario, saying Chinese officials committed inhumane acts by destroying the marine wealth and food security of the people living in countries bordering the South China Sea. She appeals for Filipinos to unite and fight for the country's rights.
While the Duterte administration remains unwilling to confront China's crimes against the Filipinos, we are not entirely helpless in seeking ways to speak and act against the criminal actions of the Chinese government.
Del Rosario, on the other hand, urged neighbors in the South China Sea to file similar communications with the ICC to hold Chinese officials liable for what he says are atrocities. Meanwhile, Carpio insisted that there are many ways to enforce the arbitral ruling, which does not include having to go to war, as what is consistently being argued by President Duterte. In an online forum, the retired High Court magistrate said there is no reason to be afraid of challenging China over the country's sovereign rights.
The Duterte administration is afraid to offend China. But why should we be afraid to offend China? It is our right.
Carpio said moving forward, the next administration should focus on settling the country's overlapping exclusive economic zone claims with neighboring countries. And unlike the territorial dispute with China, Carpio said this one is more doable. For News 5, Marlene Alcaide, we are One News.
The Supreme Court has dismissed a petition that sought to compel government to conduct mass testing. The IETF insists the country's testing capacity is enough, but Vice President Lenny Robredo begs to disagree. Jenny Deng Dongon tells us more.
The Supreme Court junked the petition that seeks to compel the government to conduct proactive mass testing and contact tracing in addressing the pandemic. With a vote of 13-1-1, the higher court dismissed the petition for mandamus. It means that the petitioners, led by former DSWD Secretary Judy Taguiwalo, failed to show they are entitled to the writ. Petitioners define proactive mass testing as testing of all suspected COVID-19 cases, contacts of probable and confirmed cases, frontline health workers, and those living in high-risk communities. But the High Court explained that their job is to say what the law is and not dictate how another branch of the government should do its job. The National Union of People's Lawyers, who are also petitioners, expressed disappointment by the decision.
We're not disheartened by the decision, but we will continue to fight for the people's right to health and right to information amid the pandemic. Nakita naman natin, tumataas pa rin yung bilang ng mga COVID-19 positive cases natin. Sa kabila ng napakahaba na ng ating quarantine period. And yet, wala pa rin tayong nakikitang improvement pagdating doon sa pagkalat ng virus.
The palace has since downplayed the petition, stressing that the government has an efficient testing program for COVID-19. Meanwhile, the IATF also disputed claims that the country still has a low testing capacity. National Task Force for COVID-19 Chief Implementer Carlito Galvez Jr. insisted that the Philippines has a better testing program compared to Japan and South Korea. He added that the government already tested 2.9 million individuals. The country has currently 122 laboratories and additional 102 for approval.
Nag-a-average na po tayo na 30,000 plus daily test average. At natutuwa po kami dahil na-break na po natin ng 40,000 mark. Nagkaroon po tayo ng 43,555 highest daily output as September 10, 2020.
However, Vice President Leni Robredo still urged the government to conduct more COVID-19 testing. She said the current testing capacity is not enough for the increasing positivity rate in the country.
Yung earlier na targets na kuha na natin, yung 30,000 tests a day. Pero ang positivity rate natin more than average as of yesterday ay 10.6% pa din. Para makuha natin yung target na to, mag-test pa tayo na mag-test. Kulang pa.
Malacanang was quick to answer Robredo's comment.
Of course, nothing will ever be enough for someone na hindi nakakakita ng kahit anong mabuti sa pamahalaan. Pero sa ngayon po, pinakamataas na po ang testing natin sa Southeast Asia, mas mataas pa po sa Korea at sa Japan. Ipapatuloy pa po natin ito dahil kung kinakailangan, dapat tayong pinakamataas na testing sa buong mundo.
But for the petitioners, it's not just about the numbers.
The numbers will not lie naman eh. The fact na marami pa rin, nagsisearch pa rin, nagsispike pa rin yung bilang ng mga positive cases natin. It only means one thing, na hindi pa rin maayos yung system natin with regard to mass testing, proactive mass testing, contact tracing and isolation. So yun yung sa tingin namin ay hindi pa rin nakasasapat.
The petitioners will file a motion for reconsideration. For the meantime, they vow to exhaust all legal and meta-legal remedies in compelling the government to conduct mass testing. For News 5, Jenny Dongon, We Are One News.
After making headlines with his surprise controversial birthday mañanita back in May, NCR Chief Police Major General Debold Sinas may be up for a promotion. PNP Chief Camilo Casculan said Sinas deserves it. According to Casculan, despite his flaws and lapses, Sinas' evaluation shows he has done his job well. He also added that Metro Manila's top cop will retire sometime in March or April next year, so chances of him being a 3-star general is quite slim. But if he will be given the chance by the president, he will be automatically promoted as a 4-star general, which is usually bestowed upon a PNP chief.
General Sinas did his job well, no? Though there may be some flaws or lapses on his part. Well, in evaluation alone, he has done his job well. Promotion is by rank and by position, okay? Well, everybody deserves to be promoted, most especially if you have done your job well. Look at it always, seniority, service reputation, and competence. Those are the key factors in promoting a person to a position and to a rank.
The Commission on Higher Education has announced preparations for possible limited face-to-face classes come January next year. Meanwhile, the Education Department reveals that the overall enrollment turnout from kindergarten to senior high school has dropped by 9%. Marian Enriquez has the story.
The Commission on Higher Education faced the House Committee on Appropriations to defend its proposed 50.9 billion peso budget for 2021. This is a 6.39% higher from its budget of 47.9 billion pesos this year. One of the highest increase in their proposed budget was allocated to the implementation of the Free Higher Education Law, in which state university students enjoy a tuition-free education. CHED is seeking a 13% increase or an additional 5.2 billion pesos for the program. CHED Chairman Prosper De Vera said around 1.79 million college students benefited from the program in the previous school year, although he admits that they are struggling in disbursing funds for reimbursement of tuition and other fees. He pinned it on the lack of manpower in their agency and the non-compliance of state universities and colleges. De Vera said their agency has only less than 1,000 personnel and about 600 plantilla positions. He adds the delay was further prolonged because of the pandemic.
Yun hong mga SUK na nagrereklamo na hindi sila nabigyan, ang totoo ho, ang marami doon, madaming non-compliance. The papers will not move if they don't comply with requirements, Dahil pag tinanggap po namin at nirelease namin yung pera, COA naman ang hahabol sa amin.
Lawmakers also asked De Vera on the status of the 300 million peso budget to be distributed to displaced teachers and non-teaching personnel under the Bayanihan to Recover as one act. However, De Vera said they will have to discuss this with other concerned agencies.
Hindi pa po namin nakikita kung paano i-implement yung para sa mga affected faculty kasi ang decision po sa Bayanihan 2, pinagsama-sama yung affected faculty ng K-12, higher ed, public and private, and the allocation was very small.
De Vera also announced that they have completed their guidelines for a possible limited face-to-face classes in low-risk MGCQ areas by January.
The guidelines have been completed in consultation with local governments, in consultation with public and private universities. The step that we need to do now, and I intend to do that with Secretary Charlie Galvez, is to look at prototypes on the ground on how the schools are retrofitting their facilities.
CHED has also ordered a private college in Isabela to immediately suspend its face-to-face classes after one of its students tested positive for COVID-19.
We ordered them to stop and we issued a show cause order for them to explain why they should not be penalized.
Over at the Senate, senators have expressed alarm over the Department of Education's report on the decline in the number of student enrollees for this school year. As of September 14, around 24 million students have enrolled. This is a 9% decrease from last year's 27 million students.
We are pushing also for the alternative learning system as well as the alternative delivery mode. Pero at the end of the day, Mr. Chair, it's really the decision of the parents.
So maging proactive ho tayo because that's the only way we can locate those 2.3. And it's really quite concerning, no? Because we don't want 2.3 million dropouts ending up with no basic education diploma.
DepEd assures them that they will accept late enrollees until the end of November. For News 5, Marian Enriquez, we are One News.
And here are the other big stories today. A military helicopter crashed in Latawan, Basilan this afternoon, killing 4 of its passengers, including the pilot. Initial reports say the Air Force rescue helicopter went down at around 12:45 p.m. in Barangay Upper Mangas. Investigations are ongoing on site. The Interagency Task Force has approved the lifting of the ban placed on locally stranded individuals bound for Western Visayas. Presidential spokesman Harry Roque confirms the lifting of the travel suspension in his online briefing earlier today. This covers stranded individuals wishing to return to their provinces such as Iloilo, Guimaras, Negros Occidental, and Antique. Roque said Roque reminded returning residents to ensure that they are not experiencing any symptoms of COVID and that they have undergone swab tests before traveling back home. Labor Secretary Silvestre Bello III has stamped down calls for the total lifting of the ongoing deployment ban on health workers. In a press conference, Bello said he is not confident that the government will favor any such move. He says health workers should prioritize Filipinos affected by the pandemic. Health workers exempted from the deployment ban are those with complete contracts for overseas employment on or before March 8. A recommendation to extend the coverage until August 31 is now pending approval for President Duterte. The LTFRB is looking to resume provincial bus operations within this month, but so far, only the provinces of Quirino, Antique, Isabela, and Bataan have agreed to let provincial buses from the National Capital Region enter their borders. Provincial bus companies have been back on the road as the economy slowly reopens amid the pandemic. In Valenzuela cities, authorities have started using QR codes in its contact tracing efforts. The ValTrace app generates QR codes for resident and non-resident users, which they will need to present before entering establishments in the city. The city government said the use of such automated contact tracing systems ensures personal information protection and more timely contact tracing procedures should an individual test positive for the virus. Residents and non-residents may register at valtrace.appcase.net, after which they will be given a unique QR code which they can save on their phones or have printed. Registration is free of charge. And that wraps up today's big story. Catch us again tomorrow, 8 p.m. on Signal Channels 8 and 250. Please like our Facebook page, One News. For more in-depth analysis, visit our webpage, onenews.ph. I'm Robbie Alampay. We are One News. Good evening.